First thing is I have to really make sure everybody understands what a local historic district is and how you become a local historic district. And that's the first part of the presentation. Without that, those are the questions I get all the time. So we're going to talk about historic preservation in Northborough for the next slide. Go ahead. There we go. So historical preservation, we get the Northborough Society, of course. It's a non-profit organization, opened in 1906. You all know that. Then there's the Historical Commission, which is a town organization. It's part of town administration. It started in 1968. It was active till around the mid-1980s, and then it stopped. And it was resurrection in 2002, a big part because of Bob Ellis. And the reason it was resurrected in 2002 is because we started to have community preservation funds. Community preservation funds means an active historical commission. It's been active since around 2002. The role of the commission is very much the same as the society: identify, evaluate, and preserve historical assets. Broaden the community awareness of our historical heritage. Sound familiar? Then there's also another town administration, the Historic District Commission, which is a totally different function. And that's what we'll be talking about tonight. It's part of town administration. It started in 1973. And it also was active to the mid-'80s. I don't know what happened in the mid-'80s where people lost interest in these two organizations. It was reactivated in 2014 when Marie Niebuhr put her house as part of a new historic district. Now we have a formal historic district. What we did in 2015 is we merged the two because we're allowed to do that. We don't want two separate commissions. We have one commission now, and it works out well. It's called the Historic District Commission. We probably spend 90% of our time on historic commission topics and 10% of our time on historic district topics. All right, local historic district information. Next slide. This is defined by Mass General Law, Chapter 40C. If you want to read it, it's pretty comprehensive. In the district, you only review changes that are visible from a public way. If you put a building in the district, it's not what's going on inside the house. It's not what's going inside in the backyard. It's not on the side. Only what you can see from a public way. If someone wants to alter something, so the Unitarian Church has gone through several iterations of alterations, they come to us. Our board has we have Tom Reardon, an architect, on it, and we make sure that any restoration or preservation work is appropriate to keep the design of the architecture. So the whole point is to preserve and protect the district historic character of the building, maintain and improve the settings of the historic properties, encourage new designs compatible with existing properties. Remember that one, we're going to come back to that one. And protect anything that does not allow demolition of the property. You can involve lawyers at that point. So the whole goal is really to keep the building architecture visible from the street. All right. Ooh, the time is perfect. What's the procedure? It's a pretty cumbersome procedure. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it takes quite a bit of work. You first have to say, what properties do we want in this district? Then you have to form a separate study committee to evaluate those properties, find out why they're significant, and then prepare a preliminary report that you have to send to Mass Historic Commission so that it's to see if that's sufficient detail for us to have a local historic district. Comes back from, we have to hold public hearings, to get community input, especially for the people that are in the district. You have to submit the preliminary report to the commission. I already mentioned that. Then you finalize the study report with all of the input from the commission and all the comments from the community. You have to prepare a warrant article for the town. It has to go to the town warrant article. It has to be voted on at town meeting, and it needs a 2/3 required vote in order to get the district in. So it's a process, and it's detailed, and it's very, very specific. So there's local historic districts, and there's national historic register districts. They are not even close to being the same, but unless you're tuned into the nuances of this, you won't recognize the differences. So I'm going to compare them here. On the left, these are, the column tells us the kinds of things that can be monitored on these and what the advantages of these districts are. Single properties are allowed. So it's kind of a misnomer. You can have a district, but in the case of Marie Neber's house, the Whitney parsonage, it is a single home local historic district. And you can do the same thing with the National Register. It can be a district of 100 houses, or it could be a single entity. Final decision. Local ones are made at town meeting. National Register, it's done through the National Park Service in the federal government. You can do the nomination cost for a local historic district is negligible. It's really volunteers' time. It's a minimum, if you're lucky, $2,500 per property, because you have to have a professional documentation. And Linda and I are learning that because we're trying to put our house on the National Register. Nomination time for local, you can do it within a year. It's plus 2 years for the National District. We're already on our second year. We got the response, and we're going to be into our third year before we get it accepted. Demolition protection, very strong with local. The National Register is really prestigious for a private homeowner. There's no demo. I can rattle off in the town of Northborough 6 buildings that were on the National Register that have been demolished. There's no protection for that. Street view protection, local very strong, National Register none whatsoever. Interior protection, neither one goes inside the building. That's never an issue with the National Register. So for this building, which is on the National Register, when you do exterior changes, well, not really changes or upgrades, the Mass Historical Commission would like to know that you've done that, but they're not going to control what you've done. Grant opportunities, this is a big one. A lot of the reason for putting these in is so you can access grants. This is the Mass Historical Commission grants, which was alluded to earlier, the 50/50 cost share. Tax credits, this is huge. Local, absolutely no input at all. National Register, it's critical to get tax advantages. As an example, White Place, if it's not on the register, they don't get tax credits. Tax credits for a building like that are in the multi-million dollars. So people are putting it on the National Register because of the requirement of getting the tax credits. All right. Next.
This is next.
Is it? Oh, thank you. I'm not paying attention. That's the problem. This list is the possible restrictions you can write into the town bylaw for a local historic district. So this is a show. These are what things that could be done, but you don't have to do them. So I'm comparing what the possible restrictions are in what the town of Northborough has on its local district, on its district. So street view architecture and design, yes, that the town of Northborough says that's important. Demolition, yes, that's important. Demolition will be difficult. Permanent signs, there's some quirkiness about permanent signs in the local district for Northborough. There's also some quirkiness on temporary signs. It really doesn't really affect us very often. House paint color, no. You could put it in, and some places like Salem and Lexington will say it has to be a certain color. Northborough, no. Terraces, walkways, driveways, sidewalks, Northborough says no. We're not monitoring that. We're not monitoring walls and fences. We're not monitoring storm windows and doors and air conditioners. Roof color, whatever you want. Landscaping, not a problem. So whenever they put this together in '73, when they put this district in, clearly the intent was just to have the visible appearance of the property from the street remaining the same without overdoing it with all these other requirements. Okay. Local historic districts in Northborough. All right. That's the next slide. How many do we have? Who knows? 2. All right. We've been paying attention. Very good. We do have 2 local districts. 2 successful local districts. So the Meeting House Common District was voted in 1973. First vote failed by 2 votes. 2/3 vote. 2 weeks later, don't know how they did this, they re-voted. And town meeting was postponed for 2 weeks. And it passed by 25 votes. If you actually look at the counts of the votes, which I did, it's the same number of people who wanted it. What happened is on the second meeting, less people showed up. It's a strategy there. The Peter Whitney parsonage, when Marie put that in 2014, it was a unanimous vote. I think it was private home, private interest, nobody in town also, nobody in town meeting said we should be doing this. Two other properties were brought to town meeting. Main Street, this is between the Passabet River and 135. They brought that to town meeting in 1971. It failed by 4 votes. It was a 2/3 majority. So a lot of people wanted it, but it didn't pass. They actually tried to go for it a couple of years later, and it still wasn't going to fly. Kind of a concern now when you consider what's going on at Main Street. And then in 2015, we brought White Cliffs in to be voted on as a local historic district. And I'll be honest with you, it was a strategy. Because if you remember that far back, the issue we had with the current owners is the demolition of that building. The demolition was happening, and we negotiated. You put this on, and if you put this on, you can't demolish the building, or give us another 6 months. We pulled it off, they gave us another 6 months, and the building is still standing. So I think we did the right thing back then. Now we'll talk about Meeting House Common District. All right. Meeting House Common District. Next slide. So, to get you oriented, this is the Unitarian Church grounds. This is Whitney Street. This is our house here. This is the Whitney Street section. And then there's a section here along Church Street. There's a couple of properties, 3 properties along Church Street. So I'm going to, yeah, that's it. So everything in that area, in an old map from 1855, those buildings were identified in 1855, and those buildings are still part of the historic district. So it's a really old section of the town. I'm going to go into detail now on these 3 areas. I'm going to start with the burial ground and First Church. This is really the heart of the district. There's a lot going on in that piece of property. All right, next slide. So we'll start with the burial ground. This site was selected in December 1744. The land was donated by Captain Eber, and he donated it for consideration of love, God, goodwill, and respect which I have towards the promoting of the worship of God. So he donated about 5 acres in that site. It included the burial ground, the old burial ground, and then all the site in front of the church. This is an old map from, this is in the archives of the town's town meetings from 1813. I liked it only because it's old, it's hand-drawn, and the reason they did that is there was some land swap in this area that changed a little bit of the lot size. Next slide. This is a map that was done by John Estabrook back in 1906, I think it is. The original is in the Unitarian Church lobby, in the back behind it. And John Estabrook actually wrote a detailed description of the property bounds and everything that was going on in that property back in 06. It's one of the pamphlets that the Historical Society has, the yellow pamphlet, and inside it has all the gory details, all the land exchanges and everything. What's interesting on this one is, it's going to come up later, this is something I didn't understand until recently, the difference between the first original old town house, which is the town hall, and the school, and then the original building. Burial ground. So the first burials were in 1749 and 1750. Some 60 children perished from the throat distemper. The disease mostly affected children and killed them off within 3 days. It was one of the greatest epidemics ever to terrify New England. And now that disease is considered diphtheria. What is the mystery? Here we have a lot plan. There's a map of all the burials. I don't know where those 60 children are buried on that site. I don't know, there's no, if you count up all of the little dead children, it's not anywhere 60, and it's not in that time frame. So I don't know if it's an unmarked site or what. That's one mystery I'd like to try to understand something. Give them the respect that they deserve. There's quite a few people, if you ever walk around in that, there's quite a few people that are famous. There's quite a few people. We have Reverend John Martin, the first town minister. We have Reverend Peter Whitney, the second town minister. Whoop. Doug Mack. There you go. There you go. No, you're going the wrong way. There we are. Okay, there we are. You're getting back there. One more. Bingo. You get the revolutionary. So the whole site for the Unitarian Church, I'm moving from a burial ground to the church. It's been the site of 3 meeting houses since 1745. The original townhouse site here. It's the original high school site. There's a meeting house in Townhouse Commons. And you have the map that I showed that was done by Estabrook. If you look at it closely, there's an actual townhouse common, not just the meeting house common, because the townhouse is there. The Bowery Bell, we've got the World War I Memorial, we've got a horse block, a parish hall, and a memorial grove. There's a lot going on in this site. Next. So the meeting house was raised on April 30th, 1745. So that was the first meeting house when Northborough became separate from Westborough. It took 11 years to finally complete the building. So they raised it in a day, but they didn't finish it for 11 years. By the time they had a floor and a pulpit and pews and galleries. It was removed when the second meeting house was built in 1808. So this is a document from the town records, just caught my eye. This is a warrant article for the second meeting house construction in 1807. It's page 195 if you want to go to the town hall and dig that out. And the main thing is they finally agreed upon a spot for the meeting house. And then, yeah, I underlined in the next sentence, I want to underline it was clearly remarked in 1807 as the meeting house common. Hence, it's the meeting house common, local historic district. All right, next one. So here's a picture I stole from online just a couple days ago from Digital Commonwealth. This is from 1902, so this is a building of the Unitarian meeting house that was built in 1808. Pretty nice looking building. Yes. This is the same building on December 22nd, 1945. Photo by Cliff Martin. I don't know if Cliff's here tonight. This is Dad took the picture. They lived across the street. This was in Life magazine, October 1940. I read something recently when the fire was so hot that living across the street was starting to get scorched. It's not really a Christmas time. This is a picture from the same article in Life magazine. Ken, thank you for those pictures. Ken got me the pictures. It was built in 1950. I think this was the day it was dedicated in Life magazine, October 9th, 1950. Next. So this is how it sits today. We put in one of the historical markers for it. And the CPA projects for this facility has been they repaired and repainted the steeple, they rebuilt the clock in the weather vane, installed new shutters on the tower, they improved the handicap access, and then we put in the new historic marker about 5 years ago. The town hall, the original town hall. So this is on a map of 1855. There's something funny here. The church really isn't here. The church is over here. But so it's called the town hall there. It's called the townhouse in other documents. So we'll talk about that for a minute. Next slide. I wish Ellen was here because it turns out this is her rendition of the description of the building. So Ellen is responsible for that drawing. So that was the original townhouse. It was built in 1821 for secular uses. So this is the time we're trying to separate church and state. It was used as a town hall until the main street, the old brick building at 4 West Main was built. So it was the town hall till then. It burned down. Fires around here. Burned down in February 1870. The lower level was used as a vestry for the Unitarian Church. It was also used as a small school. I guess there's something big about singing schools. So this is, Reverend Allen was big on having people sing. And it was also the early site for Northborough Lyceum. And I know that Kathleen Howland is going to talk about the Lyceum, and that's going to be a fascinating story. And finally, it was the first early high school until they built the other high school on the site. So there was a high school from 1866 to 1870. It turns out school was in session when they caught fire. So we get out there. Next. So this is the high school. It was used from 1870 to 1923. There's two pictures over at different angles. Right now it's a parking lot. If you go up to the site, it's that flat area to the right of the church. It was used until one of the high schools was built in 1923. Okay, did you go to that high school in 1923?
My father did. I have a couple of pictures of him in.
Excellent. I said I found a picture of your dad. What I don't know is when it was removed. If it burnt down or disassembled, I have not a clue. I couldn't find anything. Next slide. The parish hall. Next slide. The parish hall is a surplus army chapel. And the reason they have it, it was used as a temporary meeting house when they were building the third meeting house because the second meeting house burned down. It took about 5 years. So this was a temporary chapel for them at the time, but it was dedicated in 1948 so they could use it as a temporary meeting house. Well, one memorial, the highlights of the Wilmot One Memorial, certainly it's not a highlight, excuse me, it's a Picard and Adolph Nelson who died as part of the First War. One more slide. It's dedicated October 12th. Bob Ellis has given me an article quite some time ago. With all the pomp and circumstances one would expect, including a parade, bands, singing, and speeches. So, we see these monuments standing there, we don't, recognize the report, but recognize when they were installed and all the commotion that was involved. It's pretty interesting. And again, we go back to Mr. Bennett in the back, because there's one woman on there, Flora Murray. It's the only woman listed. She was a nurse in France. And how is she related to you, Ken?
She's my great aunt.
Your great aunt.
She's one of the 15 kids that George and Lucy Murray had.
Oh, and she served her.
The last one.
All right, horse block. You know what a horse block is? Yeah. So there's a horse block on the back there. It's my horse block, 1746. It's how you would dismount from a horse, especially for a woman. You would dismount on the block, and so it's like a step. We get the Paul Revere bell. We're pretty fortunate actually to have a Paul Revere bell. It's not that common. This is this picture is actually from that Life magazine article in 1950. I won't read it, but it's dedicated to Earl Taylor. Actually, there's a little bit I do want to read halfway through. That's it. The bell tolled in the death of every president from John Adams to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. All right, and the parish, First Parish Memorial Grove. Anybody go up there? You know what that is? If you're parking your car, there's a little sign, there's a bench, there's that, essentially it's that little stone ledge. This is the top of that little stone ledge. It's a very peaceful little area right in that area. I don't know who Catherine Paul Osmer was, but she must have had an impact on the community. It's a cute little spot. All right, now we'll go to Whitney Street. We'll go to the Whitney Street properties. Next. I'm starting with 25 to 29 Whitney Street. This is the Wilder Bush Mansion and Barn. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll tell you about who's like Wilder Bush. Oh, that didn't come out too good. But that's in one of the maps around here somewhere. This is one of the etchings on the side of the map of the original picture of the mansion and his barn in 1855. So the mansion was built in 1850 by Wilder Bush. A couple years ago I spoke about him. He was very influential in the town. He's not as well known as others, but he brought the first comb manufacturing in Northborough. Became a very wealthy person in town. He essentially was responsible for bringing the railroad to the town, and he was also very involved with opening the Northborough Bank. So he was the president of the bank until he died. So he had a lot to do. And the next slide is, I can't find much about the barn except Janice and Richard Ferencik lived in the barn. That's the only history I have of the barn.
First place you lived. Yeah.
Did it look like it does now, or did it look like that old barn?
The old barn.
Alright, and this is the Bush Gillard House, which is just to the left. This is how it looks today on the left, and the right is a picture, I think it's probably from the 1920s or 30s. So there's been some alterations to it, but it still has the same basic look to it. So it was built for Wilder Bush. I don't know what he used it for, if it was for staff or health, but primarily, most people know it as the Hilliard family. So Philip was the dad, he was a farmer, he was also a town selectman from 1911, and he's claimed to fame is in 1911, he staged a one-man raid on the Northborough Hotel after learning that he was dispensing alcohol in what is considered to be a trying town. So that's his claim to fame. Their daughter is also quite famous, Elizabeth. She was a high school history teacher in a different town, but she's really known for being the head Northborough librarian from 1953 to 1964. Did I get that right there? Got it right? You would know. Yes. And then there's a very famous house, 35 the Hayward Holbrook home. Everything we can find out so far is the rear section, at least some remnants of the rear section, were then built for Gideon Hayward back in 1755. The front section appears to be close to 1795, and that was built by Daniel Holbrook Sr. And it's got a classic Georgian design. And we're trying to get that house from the National Register.
No, how long is it before it becomes the Hayward, Holbrook, Corbin house?
They pass away before that happens. Hopefully not for a while. Back one slide. So Wilder Bush, we already talked about him. So I just highlighted a couple of the owners that were there. So Gilman B. Howe, he was the first president of the Northborough Historical Society. Trivia, where was the first meeting of the Northborough Historical Society? At 35 years. He's also the president of the National Geological Society. He went to Washington, he did a lot of work in Washington. He was a writer of the Howard and Bigelow family histories, so he's actually quite well known. If you Google him, there's a lot of information on this guy. Now, Ruth Webb Lee, she owned the home from 1941 to 52. She specialized in antique glassware and valentines. Published over 11 books. Put her name in, and there's books here. Bucky Rogers donated about half a dozen books to us when we moved into the house with his wife. She was famous enough to design the antique glass display for the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Next slide. So this is Mr. Bush, pretty dapper there. Next, this is Mr. Howe, Gilman Howe, who only covered one of his books. And the last slide is Ruth Webb Lee. And when we're doing the National Register in getting information, I finally got on a website that I could access newspapers. Like your name and all this stuff. Turns out she was really famous. She lived in Northborough for 10 years, and I like this item, it's all out of focus, but the main thing here is that Ruth Webb Lee, Northborough, Massachusetts, is an outstanding collector. And one of the articles, which I didn't bring up here, one of the articles has pictures of the inside of our house when she owned it, because she was a collector of the pictures of the dining room and the living room in the family room with all of her hundreds of ceramic works. So, it's not a historical house. It was built around 1984. 1980s. It replaced a barn that used to be there. This is a different example than we give. Next slide. It was built after the historic district was made. So if that's the case, the historic district's responsibility is to make sure that the new design is compatible with the neighborhood. So I was not part of this in those days. Mr. Smith, Brian Smith. So the district commission has to supply input to the design to make sure it fits in. Next slide. I don't know, I don't have a date on this article. Historic district panel gives the developer the okay. It only give the okay, there's two parts that I circled here. Historic district commission member Brian Smith was the sole dissenting vote on at the board. He was arguing that this is not the right design. And in the end, he got his way. He complained about the skull balconies and different things about the architect, but in the end, he was forceful enough that the building we have now in that corner spot is not the building that we originally designed, and it fits in better. So Brian, thank you very much. All right, so now we'll do the Church Street properties. Okay. 7173 Church Street, the Evangelical Congregational Meeting House. How many people know that this was built as a meeting house? It was not as a private home. Do you know anything about this property, Ms.
Yeah, we rattled around in that for 25 years.
So thank you for all the information you supplied me. But it's, in fact, I'm trying to write an article right now because I'm writing articles that show that you can be creative how you reuse old properties. Taking a meeting house and convert it to a private home. Actually, this is a meeting house converted to a museum.
And it was a school.
And it's a school. All right, so next slide. So this is the pew assignments in the meeting house, and they're numbered 1 through 35, and it shows you how much it costs, because you owned the pew back in those days. So that's a $6 pew, there's a $4 pew.
Wow.
So, why did they build this meeting house? Because the Congregationalists had a scission going on. First Parish and Unitarian, which was the main parish in town, were becoming very liberal. That did not go well. And then there's the Evangelical Congregationalists, which are very conservative. So they said, okay, we're going to go off and do our own thing. So they built a meeting house that was dedicated in 1832, and it was on land donated by Asa Fay, because that's people donate land to the meeting house. It had about 40 pews for 35 original members. It had a pulpit, a gallery, and eventually a bell. You know where that bell was?
Well, it was in the front because it was,
Oh, really?
you know, as it faces Pleasant Street.
Yeah. Huh.
But I've never seen a photo.
Yeah, it's opened into something like that. So it wasn't used very long. It was used in 1848. New building was built on Main Street, which we now call Trinity Church. So that's what there was back in that. 1855 was a home of Louis Fay. So after it became, the meeting house was moved, he stayed in the Fay family, and he had 10 children in that big house. Makes sense. In 1882, it converted to a college preparatory boarding school. And I'm not going to go through all of the nice information you supplied me, but there's a lot of, not antiques, but there's a lot of residual boarding school stuff in the building. So catered to boys between the ages of 10 and 18, it's a 4-year course of study, the tuition was $75,400. And of course, in 73, Kathy and Dick Pierce bought it, and then they had family members stay there, so we're going to start calling it the Pierce. The Pierce. Muster Field. So there's a sign of the Muster Field. Right now, it's only this little wedge of land that's in front of Kathy's old home. This is Church Street, and this is Pleasant Street, and there's a marker right here. But you got to think back, you know, Revolutionary War time frame. This was all one big plain. None of these houses really existed, but this is what's left in town homes there in Muster Field. This is the marker, and it's really dedicated to the Minutemen of the Revolution. If you have to go back, you always think of the Minutemen and militia. You always think of them as Revolutionary War people. That's part of what they did. But the militias were to protect the town from invasions. A lot of it had to do with the Native Americans at the time. It existed since 1645. So the militias were old. Minutemen, they were handpicked from the militia because they were kind of the elite force of the militia where they could respond quickly. Next. 49 Church Street, this is the Allen family homestead. This is Reverend Allen's home. Go ahead, I think I have another picture of it. This is a picture from the 20s. You know, all the trees growing up around it, sometimes it's hard to get that good image of it. It was built in 1817. It was built for Reverend Allen, and it was for him and his new bride, Lucy. So we're going to talk about Reverend Allen for a moment. He was the last town minister. He was a town minister from 1816 to 1828, and then he was the Unitarian minister from 1828 to 1873. The reason there's a distinction here is because Northborough no longer had one church. When there was one church, you were a town minister. But when you had a Baptist church, an evangelical church, guess what? They don't want you to be the town minister anymore. They have their own minister. So that's why it becomes just a Unitarian minister. He was a historian, and he was involved with the Northborough Street Committee for 57 years. He was very influential in the town. Yes. So him and his wife, Lucy, they were big advocates for education, the school, the Lyceum. They ran a boarding school in their house. And to do that, they added a third floor. But also the first Northborough newspaper was done by the students in that house. They were prolific journal writers, and many, many descendants stayed in the field of education. And there's a picture of Reverend Allen and Lucy Clark Allen. So the last site is the local historic district is Peter Whitney Parsonage, and I think this is Lois's photograph, and I just stole it off. I just stole it off this morning's announcement. All right, next slide. So this is the Peter Whitney Parsonage. Okay. Next, the picture on the left isn't very clear. That's too bad, but it's a sketching, an early sketching, and if you stand at that spot, it looks the same today. And then there's a picture of a sketch of Reverend Whitney. So the original structure was built in 1741. And Nathaniel Oakes and his wife, and I had to do it this way, Mahidabel. He was one of Northborough's first settlers, and he actually used it for religious services before the building was built in the church. Then it was purchased by Reverend John Martin. It became his pastoral home. He was the first minister in Northborough. Judas Monis lived there. He essentially retired there. He was a house guest of the Martins. He taught Hebrew at Harvard College for over 40 years. His students included George Adams, John Hancock. So a lot of connections there. Reverend Whitney, the second town minister, he was a town minister of Northborough. He purchased the house in 1770 from the previous town minister. He was very active in the Patriot Revolution. He parade with the militia on their way to fight for conquering Lexington. He also wrote the first history of Worcester County. And in it is Northborough, and that's dedicated to essentially his friend, John Adams, the Vice President of the United States. A couple more things about him. He was a town minister for 40 years. He was very acquainted with John Hancock and John Adams. I looked up the information that Marie had to put it in for the National Historic District, and she had found letters communicating between Whitney and Adams and Whitney and Hancock. Correspondence. And another one, 1780, is burnt to the ground. Burnt to the ground. The story is it burnt to the ground while Reverend Whitney was giving a sermon. He was handed a note. It's on fire. He just kept on with his sermon. Marie, and then so the building we're looking at now was built in 1780. Richard and Marie Niebuhr, they did a thorough historic restoration of the house. They're fully responsible for putting it on the national register. And that is excuse me, the local district. All right, now to wrap it up, potential future districts. 2008, 2009, we had historic inventories done for the town. About 300 properties were inventoried as historic sites. Most of them were almost all before 1900. And part of that study was to tell us what buildings and properties could or should be considered for a national register or a local register. Some of the area districts they recommended, Main Street between Astor River and South Street. So that's still one target we're looking at. interesting neighborhood around Summer Street and School Street, that intersection. It's actually a nice neighborhood, and he said there's enough unique properties there that could be considered as a district. White Cliffs, of course, the Woodside Mill and associated buildings. If you look at the Woodside Mill, which is now an apartment complex, and you just stay a quarter of a mile from that mill, there's all kinds of housing that was associated with that mill when it was operating. Next, some individual districts, the Historical Society, they recommended it's on, to put it on. It's on. Our house is nominated. The old burial grounds, Howard Street is in the process of being nominated, now the nomination document has been sent in. Also recommended a relatively new property, the Vera Green Home at 333 Howard Street. It was probably built in the 30s, and that's just a picture of it. It's very, yeah, it's very well, thank you. He didn't build it, but it's that kind of design. And then the Halloway Home, which is on 302 Church Street, which is one of the oldest homes in town. So I need to acknowledge the Northborough history books of Allen, Kent, Mulligan. Just read those things. I'd say 90% of what I have from out of those books. Of course, the Historical Society, the archives, I think it's Alan and Kathy. Alan and Kathy gave me a lot of information. Ken Bennett, thank you for the Life magazine, and Google, my God, he's I think that wraps it up. I ran a little 5 minutes more than my half hour. I apologize for those of you who get home for